I was like, I should have asked for questions, or I don't know what we're doing, it's
Well,
totally.
that's kind of one of the things that I like about this context is we can just chat and see what comes up.
Right.
Um, I like the organic nature of it. I think that's, yeah, I think people maybe gain more out of it. We'll see.
Yeah,
That's the idea anyway.
totally.
Yeah,
I realize you have to pretend something exists before it exists.
that's
So,
right.
you know,
Yeah, I like that. Um, so just for people who are watching and listening, um, this is sort of another conversation in this series of conversations in the middle, and this is my friend Sweethome, who's been kind enough to join me for this conversation. And Sweethome, do you want to just say a little bit about where you're living, what you've been involved in, and why this conversation feels important to you?
sure, yeah. I have been living in Portland, Oregon for the past 12 years. Slow evolution into uh, owning a piece of property, a quarter acre of land, and turning it into a animal sanctuary so that I have rescue animals here. And my main focus, um, and how I turned my work into a giving thing, a nonprofit, let's say, of into the Yoga and Animal Rights Alliance. I started out as a yoga teacher, and then I figured out how to make that service rather than extraction, I guess you would say. And so I have Yoga and Animal Rights Alliance, and then we're having this conversation because when the pandemic happened, and then George Floyd's murder, and it just reawoke something that seemed perhaps dormant, the civil rights movement, or low. It was underground, in a sense. I was living my life thinking I was doing being the good person. And then I was like, wait a minute, I have not been paying attention to a lot of human things.
Yeah.
I got burnt out, actually, just like to even step back further. When I came to Portland from that small town where we met each other in Port Townsend, I came here to manifest things and to connect and to be of service. And I worked for street yoga, or I was involved with street yoga, which we taught yoga to youth at risk of homelessness, homeless youth, incarcerated youth. I even taught, adults, sometimes that were, challenged, institutionalized, all kinds of people. But
Yeah.
I burnt out, and it's much easier to love animals than
Yeah.
it is to love human animals.
Yeah. 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 And just out of curiosity, um, I don't remember if y'all had a bunch of animals. Has that always been a thing for you?
Yeah,
Animals?
well, that's in my book too. I write about that. Did you get it yet?
I haven't gotten it yet. No. Yeah.
Should- Perhaps today or
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Um, it's in the ethers, traveling from me to you. But
Good.
I talk about it because, yeah, we had goats. I milked goats.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you guys did milk it. Now I
Yeah,
do remember that.
I
Yeah.
was the goat lady for a little while, or I felt like the goat lady for a little while. And I raised chickens. I raised meat birds. Even, we were trying to homestead and be homesteaders. Um, and but now I have all the animals are rescues, and
Yeah.
um, I write about it in my book a little bit. I'd like to actually write about it a little bit more. That I don't my everything's questionable, or a question worthy of questioning.
Yeah.
Some people wouldn't say I was a vegan because I eat the eggs that my chickens lay, or if I'm in another country, there's I have a soft line, I guess, at times, but in general, I try to cause it as little harm, and I don't buy products that are animal products.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mm.
And was that a progression towards, let's say, like veganism and this idea of do no harm? Was that a progression that you can put your finger on? Again, sorry if it's in the book, but this is
No,
a good book
no,
for your book, by the way. Maybe other people are going to get the book. Yeah.
The progression, the evolution of just like, I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen that you don't realize they're pushing you towards something,
Mhm.
like, and they seem, they're not in my control. You know, for example, my daughter Lola was lactose intolerant, and we had a challenging time for a while when we were eating cheese and, you know, dairy, and uh, you know, a single mom loves stopping at the pizza shop for
Yeah.
pizza
Totally.
for their kids,
Yeah.
and then she got really sick,
Mhm.
and then she became a vegan. But then we're always curious and learning and being educated. And that same daughter, Lola, she at one point she decided to watch every documentary that was produced on Netflix. You know, so whether it was, you know,
Documentary.
full spectrum, you know. So she knows a lot about a lot of weird things.
That's good.
And
Maybe I'll take that on this winter. Maybe I'll do that too.
there's some crazy things going on out there.
Yeah, yeah, there is. Yeah. Um, so crazy things going on out there. Uh, I think something that you said in the beginning sort of struck me, which is you said, I don't remember exactly how you worded it, but something along the lines of, you know, you thought you were being a good person,
Mm-hmm.
but weren't sort of faced maybe with some of the things that you feel faced with now. And that seems like something that this time period really has brought before a lot of us. Um, we've been faced with things, whether it was from shutdowns, the pandemic, that sense of safety, you know, of feeling safe, living in a safe environment in this country where most of our needs are taken care of, et cetera, to all of a sudden realizing that that death could come because you touched the wrong surface at the grocery store, or you know, and then now the social unrest, and of course the election, and I think there's just a lot of stuff that is sitting on the table in front of us that we were happily unaware of
As,
um,
as
even
white,
months ago.
yeah, as white people were unaware of, you know, these things. Like, it's not like racism was not prevailing all over the place, you know, especially for the past 14 years.
Yeah,
But I was living in you know, in general, we all live in a white world, and don't we don't a white able-bodied person that can hear and see, and you know, that has wealth behind me, just support. You know, there's a lot of things that I don't have to pay attention to.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. So there's this. It's sort of the context, right? The fish doesn't understand what water is, right?
right? Mm-hmm.
Um, so particularly race is something that you've been heavily involved in, trying to bring consciousness to this the divide that sort of divides, let's say, people of privilege and people of lacking in privilege,
Mm-hmm.
that tends to fall along lines of color. um, how do you think that this last 6 months has brought awareness to people, in a way that hadn't happened? I mean, there was something about George Floyd that really ignited.
Well, I think that there's racism and capitalism that are completely integrated. They can't exist, you know. Racism like can't exist without capitalism, and vice versa. You know, capitalism, somebody always has to be taken advantage of,
Mhm.
and racism is set up to create a hierarchy. And um, the pandemic slowed something down, this wheel that we've all been on, this fantasy that we're here to make something of ourselves.
Right. The American dream.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, that's not the purpose. My purpose here, I mean, for me personally, my purpose here is to understand more, to relate more, to connect more, always like to, you as a child, being somebody who's like, what is, 9 years old, and I'm like, something's going on here. What's going on here? What is this? What is happening here? And then you start experiencing challenges, and how are you going to navigate the world? So that continues on, and as you grow through time, you get wide, your perspective gets wider and wider and wider. I mean, that's the only way I can describe life, like my goal in life being. So in a time where the pandemic, the pandemic, and then George Floyd is murdered, not the first, it happens constantly, and it has been for hundreds of years here, but all eyes are on that, and there's space for us to say, hold on a second, what's going on? And we have a person in power that is instigating and encouraging division, divisiveness, racism, nationalism, and yeah.
So it's sort of like we got put in a pressure cooker a little bit, yeah?
Yeah. Or there was a pause where we could wake up from the dream that is kind of a nightmare for a lot of people.
Right. Could you talk about that nightmare a little bit? One of the things that I think upsets people about some of this, the classic sort of refrain is, well, I'm not racist, this isn't my problem, right? So, but what I want people to get past, what I think is important to get past, is this idea of, am I racist or am I not a racist, or am I anti-racist, and just to understand more about the human condition. So can you talk a little bit about why you think it's hard to be Black or brown in America?
I don't know how I could talk about that. I mean, I'm not Black or brown in America. I think what's important is to listen to the Black and brown people, people that need to be heard, that haven't been heard, to deeply listen to them, to give them space, to not take any of it personally, to acknowledge. I mean, I don't even know, it doesn't even really matter. I mean, it matters deeply if I'm racist, anti-racist, or not. There's no such thing as not racist. I mean, that's kind of a point. I don't want to say it's a moot point, but what matters is that there are people that there is injustice, there is inequality, it doesn't even matter about me. It matters about what other people, what's going on for other people. How can I feel good about my life if I know that people are suffering right next door or down the street? I want to become more sensitive rather than, insensitive to and we need it more and more and more as we get over all of our human drama. And then we're going to be realizing that while we've been doing this, a small group of people have sold off the rights to the Arctic wilderness and are drilling for oil as we speak and destroying, creating oil spills that are unable to be stopped.
Yeah.
They will never not be stopped. It's like hitting the jugular vein.
Yeah, I like what you said about racism or anti-racism, or being racist or being anti-racist being a bit of a moot point, because the way I see it anyway, is that it seems like a bit of a distraction from this idea that we could actually look around at the people who live in our communities and
Yes.
try and understand what their lives may be like, and what are the factors that create a context for them that's different than my context or your context. And because I think at the end of the day, I think we're all loving, caring people, and we don't want to see other people suffer.
Well,
And
there are some people that are not loving, caring people. We can't, I mean, maybe if you get down to the, possible, the potential when the sperm and the egg met, but there are people that are not loving people. There are sick people. We are sorry, I interrupted you, but
go ahead.
real quick, like, we are all sick.
Mm-hmm.
We are all sick. We are sick with greed, capitalism, judgment, self-preservation, ego, all of these things. And, yeah, ideally I do believe that we are all founded in, love is the central connecting light.
Mm-hmm.
But
So when I say I think we're all loving people, one of the things, okay, aside from sociopaths, right?
We can have a conversation about that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Everybody in Wall Street, everybody who's a politician.
So, but here's the thing. This is what kind of gets me about this, is that I think that probably a vast majority of those people, when they go home at the end of the day and they walk in the door and their daughter runs and says, "Daddy, Daddy, you're home," mm-hmm. right? Then the love is there. And so what I think happens is we've got this ability to sort of draw walls and say, these are my people, this is who I love, and then everybody else is other, right? So it doesn't matter what happens to them. Or just psychologically, there's a block to empathy, mm-hmm. to empathizing with what's happening to people outside that bubble. And so these people who can feel love for their families, their immediate communities, the capacity for love is there. Yeah. So how do we open that bubble, right, and expand out to that let that empathy expand out to touch these others, the people who have become othered in the reality of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the whole practice of yoga and the teachings of yoga are all about, and Buddhism too, Taoism,
Christianity, right?
Yeah, totally. All spiritual, the spiritual and soul seeking paths all bring us back to, like, how do we stay connected and relating. There's nobody can answer that but the individual. Mm-hmm. And then we get into that conundrum. We're in a conundrum, so much of the time. And not to discount what's going on right now, like there's all of me that is completely grateful, so grateful that I live in Portland, Oregon right now. And all of this is really the door is right there for me to walk through always. Like, I wake up in the morning and I have the option completely to, and the responsibility, and sometimes it even feels like the burden, which I'm grateful for, to be like, okay, how am I going to be of service today to the Black Lives Movement, to bringing equity into the world, to Indigenous sovereignty, And then also to just recognize that I'm an individual person that needs to nurture my own family and my own life. Um, and there's some really deep complications with our situation. I mean, I struggle daily. Every day I weave through great depression and sorrow and white tears, or maybe they're not. I don't know. Um, Going from being just focusing on that spiritual individual um, journey, and then how I fit into the generation and the era and the time that I'm living in.
Yeah.
How am I going to feel good about myself through all this?
So, you said it's so complex, and it is. And to me, to understand systemic racism, how that ties into capitalism, all of that, I think the true change will come through education. And over time, changing minds and our understanding of what we want our world to look like, we have to be given options to choose from, right? And those options are to expand our sense of what's possible takes time, because it takes time not just to say, well, this could, the world could look like this, but this is so far from where we are. Then we have to implement sustainable change, right, to get to this place. And that takes time, possibly generations. But but what's going on in places like Portland, I find to be really interesting. And I would like for you to maybe help me and help other people understand, what role does the kinds of protests that are happening right now, this sense of urgency that is so present in these protests, and then what I'm really curious about too.
What do you mean there's a sense of urgency in these protests?
Um, the sense that I get, and again, I'm not in Portland, and I'm
Yeah, I
not.
was wondering what you meant when you said these kinds of protests, or what you were.
So that's a great question. That leads to my next question. The protests that I guess I see this on some sort of a spectrum, and I think we talked about this. God, I wish I could remember what the term was, and we talked about it before, and I didn't remember then either. So there's clearly there's marches, there's what we could call peaceful protests, right? And then as the media has coined the term, mostly peaceful protests. And then there's what we talked about before, right? Walking into a restaurant, surrounding a table, and not leaving that table until these people put their fists in the air, Black Lives Matter, and all the way to looting and spray painting buildings and things like this. So we've got this spectrum.
But no, that's no you actually only described the media aspect. Like, what I heard you say was just like a bunch of hype, in some senses. Uh, like you weren't talking about hype, but you were describing the stuff that's seen on TV and
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Because that's what everyone's seeing. Unfortunately, not everyone, not the people who are on the ground at the protests, but what a lot of people have, and the media's done a horrible job, the politicians have done a horrible job of, everybody's conflating all of that stuff together. And
it's all stuff that's outside, that's action, that's direct action. And then there's so many direct actions that we take that are really important in our daily lives. Like the mutual aid is, when I think of the being here in Portland, like my gratitude for being here in Portland is the community building spectrum that's happening here, the mutual aid, the education that is happening through direct experience. I mean, I'm not talking about book club education. I'm talking about like listening to people speak, and making commitments to deeply listening to Black and Brown voices and Indigenous voices. Um, uh, Baking cookies for a home that is they were threatened to be evicted. It's an Afro-American, Afro-Indigenous family that has lived there for the 50s through gentrification and complicated foreclosure and eviction, and the whole land grabbing that's happened in Portland in the past, and the injustices through manipulative real estate bargaining and all of that. What's it called? Predatory real estate, or something to that effect. Anyhow, feeding homeless folks, making sure that there's American Sign Language in the meetings, the public forums, and at the gatherings that are considered protests or rallies. The counter protests, because there are still Proud Boys and Nazis, basically racists, coming in and showing that they're proud of being racist, which is basically, like, in essence, being proud of hating yourself, because there is no such thing as race. We're a human species, for one. And also it's just focusing on hate rather than love. So I really like the protest of love that I see. So
Great. That's beautiful, because that is not being featured. So people who are getting information about the Black Lives Movement are not seeing that.
yeah, I spend, like, every week, I do my best to weekly support a woman, Letha is her name, and her son is Patrick Kimmons, who was murdered by the police. They were not reprimanded, or and nothing happened to these police who shot her son 9 times in the back while he was running away. So there's a weekly march for her to call for justice. There's feeding people, like I said earlier. But I interrupted you. What were you saying? I'm really good at interrupting.
No, great. Yeah, I love, that's what conversation is to me. So yeah, so no, that's great. You didn't interrupt. I think it's really awesome to hear about, again, the full spectrum of what it means to be an activist. Be active for, I don't even want to say this movement, because that cheapens it in a way too, but to be active on behalf of people who have less of a voice. And
yeah, or the beings that have less of a voice.
Yeah, right. Yes, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
I constantly am thinking about how, we get through realizing that humans need to be all respected and honored, and then we have to go through it all again with the
Gotta take it
animals.
all the way down to the dirt, right?
All the
All the way
pigs and
down.
the factory farms, and
Yep.
the torture and brutalization of the animals that are
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes
we can
down
have
to,
milk.
yep. Yeah. Yeah. It comes down to, and I think it goes back to what you were saying before. It's beings, right? Like then you can go all the way down to a planetary level, right? We're all part of this one organism. Would you mind just talking for a minute though about, so you really helped me conceptualize some of the other things that are going on as part of this, again, we'll just call it this movement. What's if you can speak to this, and I understand your hesitancy to do so, but what is the sense of the activity that the media does portray and does tie to Black Lives Matter? Can you talk about what the sense of those activities are within, maybe we could say, the bulk of the movement, or the people who you feel are really active at the heart of that movement? What's their take on those kinds of activities?
On those kinds of activities?
The activities that we were talking about before, the more extreme activities that the
Direct actions?
like, so like looting and going into restaurants and surrounding people and sort of hassling people as they walk down the street. These kinds of things that is what the news really likes to show, and 100% calls this, or connects this activity to Black Lives Matter. Is there a sense within the heart of the movement that this is helping, hindering, condone, not condone? Is there?
Yeah, I can't really speak to that. I don't even know. I mean, I wouldn't even say that I know what, what the Black Lives Movement means, or what, Antifa is, or,
Yeah.
all those things. I
I don't think
understand.
anybody knows what Antifa is. Yeah.
What did you say?
I said, I'm sorry, I'm going to move to better light. I don't think anybody knows what Antifa is.
Well, I know that Antifa is, if you are an anti-fascist, then you are Antifa.
Right.
There's, I in at the essence of who I am is I'm an anarchist, and I feel like there's a lot of people who are anarchists that are definitely against fascism. Fascism is the opposite of anarchy, and anarchy is being autonomous, having self-knowledge, and also needing to know how to respect your own space and other people's space. I think that's really important.
What's really interesting is when I hear you give that description, it sure sounds a hell of a lot like what a lot of people on the far right are saying too, which is, sort of more the libertarian view of small government, self-responsibility. Anyway, it's interesting. It's really interesting.
It is interesting. I do. Yeah, it's like this. There's goals. I was writing today, and I was like, I mean, then it takes me not to this political, left or right, but to, Taoism, and that the non-dual, all duality arises from non-duality, and my solitude is like the finest golden thread in a complicated weaving of loneliness. So my solitude, or my freedom, it's like every quality, every truth is that fine golden thread that's like hidden in this cloak of the opposite. Just like you're saying, every person has love and a sense of nurturing, a sense of love in the center of their life.
Yep.
I think everybody realizes they're an anarchist if they're able to get unbrainwashed.
We're all anarchists. Some of this, and this is probably way above our pay grade, but that's never stopped me before, is interesting. So one of the things you just said was this sort of idea of all duality springs from non-duality, and according to ancient Chinese thought, and it plays out. It's so easy to see that this idea of yin and yang is a universal law, right? In this reality of form that we live in, yin and yang is absolute. There are other things that I see going on right now that are also sort of hardwired into us as human animals. And I think that's why it makes it so difficult to figure out how to pull us out of the trap of being locked into that way of viewing things. So we were talking about this idea of, well, I love my family, but when I go out on the street, those people aren't my family, right? So it's this idea of us and them, right?
Mhm.
And certainly there is some hardwire, biological hardwiring for us to think that way, that evolutionarily we have been sort of conditioned over thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years to operate in the world this way.
Mhm.
So it makes it a really difficult, because we were talking before and you were saying like we all have an illness, and that is true, from a spiritual perspective, and yet from a biological perspective, it's just how we're wired. And that makes it really difficult because then
When I was talking about our illness, I
yeah.
was talking about white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about the patriarchy. I was talking about, yeah.
So I'm just gonna I'm sort of, I could see how one might look at that and say, well, that's just an extension or an extrapolation of this idea of tribalism, of this is mine and that's yours, and this idea of othering. We've complexified the othering, and we came up with reasons why that person is not deserving of my love and attention, because they're black or they're brown or they're purple. It doesn't fucking matter, really. It's just an excuse to justify
Oppressing them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it also is an excuse to justify the feeling that we get because of this wiring, because of this hard wiring.
Yeah, the fear, the fight or flight. And I think you're speaking to like the fact that, biologically, a long, long time ago, when we had to protect ourselves, when we saw, someone who didn't look like us, we felt threatened and we were protective.
Yeah.
But we've been at the top of the food chain, and have been manipulating things for such a long while that other things have been able to be developed, and and have evolved, I think. So it's not like we're stuck in that way. I think
I
that
agree.
our evolution is towards relationship rather than separation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, I think this is one of the things that's really interesting about this, is that and maybe it's that it requires a spiritual perspective to understand, to sort of remove oneself from that biological perspective, from that.
Except that I think about a lot of times like the African savanna,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like all kinds of different animals hanging out together.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna just like, it's not like they're like, oh my God, the zebras aren't, or like the lions aren't looking at the giraffes and saying, oh my God, they're different than us, let's kill them all. They're just like, we're living until we need to satisfy what we need to survive. We're not going to take more than we need. We're not going to, yeah, and we're not going to cause imbalance. We're going to stay in balance.
Yeah, and there's also, animals do display territorial tendencies as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have the resources in this area, and if another herd comes into this area, or another group of animals comes into this area, this is our zone, right? I'm pissing on this thing, so who it belongs to.
Yeah, but humans and white people,
Mm-hmm.
Europeans, colonizers,
Uh-huh.
they didn't just like take care of their space and nurture their family. They said, we are going to take everybody else's shit.
Yeah.
We are diseased, and the Homo sapien actually has that quality as well.
Mm-hmm.
Back 70,000 years, it's that book Sapiens, if you've ever
Yeah,
read it.
I'm probably about halfway through it at this point.
Yeah, it's hard to read all the way through, but the first 100 pages were really good.
Yeah.
And they told me that we Homo sapiens are basically like serial killers on the planet.
Yeah.
Anywhere we go, we just kill everybody else.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
So can I ask you, a question? If that is true, right, and all the humans on the planet currently are Homo sapien, no
Yep.
matter what color they are, right? how do we how do we then create a world or a mindset in us as people of inclusiveness and acceptance and generosity to overcome that tendency in us that has been there since we evolved into what we are now,
I
to
think
want
it has,
dominance?
well, I mean, not that I don't know the answer, but I mean, I'm doing my best to diminish the ego, you know, and to relinquish selfish motive.
Mm.
Seems like that's the journey.
Yeah.
And
How do we get everybody on board with the journey?
uh, dismantle white supremacy and the patriarchy.
But do you think, so let me ask you this. So I agree that those things need to be dismantled, but do you think that that tendency that we just talked about to dominate and to doesn't exist in people of color, doesn't exist in
I didn't, I mean, when I say dismantle white supremacy, I'm not saying dismantle white men. You know, if I say dismantle white supremacy and white and patriarchy, I'm not saying let's get rid of white men.
Sure, sure.
It's in all of us. It's a system. It's a disease, you know. It's something that we're all, you know, we all have our parts
Mhm.
in the process of that. There's trauma in you know, black and brown bodies and indigenous bodies, and there's major guilt in white bodies, and um, um, I cannot speak to, I don't know the answers. I just know that you know what, I don't know anything.
Well, we're here having this conversation. Neither of us do.
Yeah,
You know,
I,
but I really appreciate you doing this, Sweethome, because just to sort of wrap on these ideas, I think is useful. And I hope that these conversations are happening all over the country, recorded or not. I just hope that people are sitting down and sort of thinking through these things and really trying to understand what's at the heart of some of these issues, because without that understanding, it's really difficult to see a way forward. So
well,
I really,
and
yeah.
also willingness, a willingness, like our conversation, you know, there, I don't, like I end with saying, I don't know anything, because tomorrow I might learn something that I was completely blind to today, you know. And so, but I don't want that to, um, you know, freeze me into like not acting. So I, as I've said, as of late, you know, I struggle because um, it's hard times to, there is no being a good person, you know. There's some major reckoning that needs to happen. There are, you know, equations that are playing out that do not work out, and we're going to have to pay for all of this, like falsifying information. You know, it just breaks my heart to think about all of the treaties that were just pushed to the side after colonizer already came and, you know, stole things and took things and treated others as property, and you know, and brutalized people and disregarded them, and disrespected them. And we're still trying to be like, oh, let's just forget about that. And it's been a, you know, a rigged game for ever since the beginning of this foundation of this country. So to be sitting here, in my position, which, I'm not a wealthy person, but I'm extremely privileged in the bigger picture. I mean, just the fact that I can say I live on a piece of land that is mine, um, is incredible. And I have to face that and see how I can, you know, uh, undo the work of my ancestors that caused so much harm,
Mhm.
unwittingly or wittingly, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. It's interesting. My grandfather had this saying that he used to always, I can still hear him to this day saying it, but it was, to he who much is given, much is expected.
Mm.
This idea that um, privilege comes with responsibility.
Hmm.
That's kind of what I hear you saying now.
Yeah, I think so. I would say I'm feeling a lot of responsibility, and I'd rather see it as that than guilt.
Yeah.
Like I have opportunity here, especially. And then I want to mention, because you're saying linking that my statements about anarchy and being able to do what I want, being autonomous.
Right.
I think that saying that sounds a lot like the right wingers is one thing, but I will, I think generosity and compassion and empathy and, uh, you know, humility, um, really have to stay directly around anarchy, like circling around that anarchist person.
Mhm.
Because the minute that I say I can do what I want,
Mhm.
I don't care how it affects you,
Right.
that's when it's no longer a functioning system.
Well, actually, that could be an interesting part to this conversation, because I think that a lot of uh, the words are so powerful, and they carry so much more. They carry something different for everyone who hears them, for one, and then we build up meaning, and the meaning travels with the word, right? So just using the term anarchist, or using the term, there was another one we had tonight that was powerful too. Oh well, no, but let's another one that draws a lot of, and again, I don't have personally to have time to get into this tonight, but defund the police. That's another big triggering group of words, that
Who does that trigger?
a lot of people.
What
I can say
what
that even for
what
myself,
kind of
I
people?
have I have been triggered by those words before too, because
And
I
why?
work with people.
Why?
Well, I work with people in law enforcement sometimes in the work that I do, and one of the things that I see is that for the work that they do, um, that actually they're lacking in training, right? That they would be better served by more training, which includes more funding, to be able to do their job in a way that serves everyone
Mm.
better.
So you're
Um,
saying that the police are not trained to do what they're supposed to be doing. Let's say just one
yeah,
faction,
yeah.
the police, law enforcement. Are they is it like mental health or something? Are you talking about?
Yeah,
Or
well, so that's a big one. So one of the projects that I'm working on right now is,
so why train a police officer to be deal with mental health then
oh
when
no, I'm sorry, I'm not talking about them dealing with. First of all, they need to be able to recognize the difference between, right, and really what that comes down to. I'm actually talking more about their own mental health. Um,
okay.
so, but I think so this is just an example, to go into a situation and have the situational awareness requires a certain level of, um, um, the autonomic nervous system has to be regulated in a way that they can maintain mental functioning at a level that would allow them to make distinctions, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that is very difficult to come by unless you've done specialized training in order to regulate the nervous system in such a way to deal with the kinds of situations that they deal with on a regular basis. So, so to be able to, so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
I want to like suggest a metaphor. Okay, so if I have a box outside, you know, it's like just a wooden box, and I put, you know, perishable goods in that wooden box, and then I'm saying, oh, this wooden box, you know, it doesn't have a cooling system. You know, I need to give it more funding to you know, I need to give it, put a cooling system in this box, but I have a refrigerator in the kitchen, you know, or I have, you know, something else. The police is in many ways, the police has so much funding to be so many things that why is it the police? The police is like that box. You know, if I need mental health, or if I need somebody who has that skill with that autonomic nervous system to be able to make decisions, why am I thinking it has to be police that is that person that you're talking about for that situation? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
I think that the situations that, you know, in situations where, let's say, violence is, if not imminent, suspected, then personally, for me, in a society that I want somebody that is trained to deal with violence to be in that situation. And
right.
so if you're going into a violent situation, so now we're talking about the police inherently in my scenario.
Why do we have police? What are police? What do police do?
In my mind, they are or they should be, they are the sanctioned members of society who are there to implement force.
Police are there to implement force. Okay.
Yeah.
They
have that potential to implement force where force is needed. This goes back to what we were saying before, right? If anybody can implement force, then it's lawlessness. The nature of a society based on laws that we all collectively agree on is that somebody has to play the role of enforcing those laws.
Well, I don't know. I don't have any laws in my life that I need to enforce. You know, the laws that are in, and I'm speaking as a privileged white person that hardly ever deals with the police, because the police aren't there to enforce the you know, the laws that they're I don't even want to talk about this because I don't have the right information about it. I don't have the skills to talk about the police and defunding the police. But I definitely feel strongly about defunding police because, you know, like if you say we've defunded schools forever, we've defunded education, we've defunded like healthcare, we've defunded everything but the police as of late. And now I think the statistics are that police budgets in most cities, it's like half of the police budget, half of the budget goes to police. But we can defunding the schools doesn't trigger you, but defunding the police, you know, I'm not you specifically, but you know, like
no, I think, hey, look, I think it's great. That's why I think, you know, back to my original point, we throw words out there and these words are triggering to people.
Right.
And then there's no conversation because then we're just all triggered, right? But I think this is exactly the conversation that needs to happen because, you know, I agree with you 100%. And I think, you know, whether or not they need more money or less money, it's really what it comes down to is what's the appropriate way to spend that money and how do you train anyone? How do you get money in school systems to be most effective? How do you get money in government to be most effective, to be in the places where it's really needed, to provide the services that we really need the most? And so I think, you know, again, that's why this is such an interesting conversation because I just said the words defund the police and we we could go on about this for a long time. And I think it's great. And I think we should. I think, again, I don't have time tonight, but I think these are the kinds of conversations that need to take place so desperately. That's why I wanted to kind of do this, is that just to show people that, you and I may see it differently, but we can have a conversation, and I can hear you and you can hear me.
But that's because you're willing and I'm willing.
Yeah.
You're probably a little more willing than me.
Well, anyway, I really do appreciate this, Sweethome. I do. And again, I'd love to do a part 2 if you want. I'm down.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it'd be cool.
Sounds good. I'll go get a little more educated on the defunding the police.
Me too. Well,
thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope you have a good evening and take care.
Same. And yeah, we'll touch base soon.
Okay, great.
Okay, thanks.
Cheers.
Okay, bye.
Bye.